My friends, at 95 years old, I've learned something about headlines. The louder they are, the more likely it is that people miss the real story sitting quietly underneath. Tonight's headline is loud, almost theatrical. 1 minute ago, Trump hit with emergency impeachment cabinet on the brink of collapse. Cable news is buzzing. Talk shows are in a frenzy. Analysts are filling whiteboards with arrows and timelines. Supporters are furious. Opponents are celebrating. But all of them, and I mean all of them, are missing what actually matters. Because impeachment is not the news. It's the symptom. The real story is the fault line deep under Washington. A structural shift in our institutions so severe that markets around the world are already quietly recalculating risk. And that, my friends, is far more dangerous than whatever political drama is playing on television. The emergency impeachment that shouldn't have been possible. You see, impeachment is a constitutional process. Slow, deliberative, designed to be insulated from emotion. But what happened today wasn't slow. It wasn't deliberative. It wasn't normal. The House of Representatives used a procedural mechanism that has been invoked only twice in American history. A fast-track emergency impeachment provision reserved for situations where the presidency is deemed an imminent threat to constitutional order. This is not a symbolic vote. This is not a messaging gesture. This is Washington pulling the fire alarm. And you don't pull a fire alarm unless you smell smoke. The question is, where's the fire? The trigger, the failed executive override. People think this emergency impeachment is tied to a policy dispute. It isn't. It was triggered almost instantly when the president attempted something extraordinary last night, a direct override of a federal court order. Now, presidents have disagreed with courts before. They've criticized rulings, they've appealed decisions, but they don't issue internal directives ordering cabinet officials to ignore a binding judicial injunction. Because once you do that, you're not arguing with the judiciary. You're attempting to step outside the constitutional framework entirely. And when rumors leaked that White House staff received a midnight directive urging agencies to proceed regardless of judicial interference, everything snapped into motion. Lawyers panicked. Cabinet officials hesitated. Agencies froze. Nobody wanted to be the one to obey an illegal order. And nobody wanted to be the one to refuse a presidential directive. This is how institutions fracture. Quietly, in confusion, in fear. And within minutes, the House leadership realized that the president had crossed a line that simply cannot be crossed. So they invoked their emergency powers, not out of politics, out of self-preservation. This is where markets start paying attention. Now, I want to make something clear. Markets don't care about impeachment itself. They've priced it in. Both parties have done it. Both presidents have survived it. What markets fear is when the executive branch shows signs of operating outside the boundaries of predictable governance, because markets are built on assumptions. The biggest assumption is stability. When a president tries to override the courts, that assumption evaporates. I've said for decades that I don't care much about Washington. But even I pay attention when the legal system and the executive branch appear to be on opposite ends of a constitutional rope. Because if the executive branch slips its restraints, there is nothing more destabilizing for an economy, not inflation, not oil shocks, not recessions. Institutional breakdown is the one thing markets cannot hedge against. The cabinet split, the part nobody wants to report. The headline says, "Cabinet on the brink of collapse." And for once, the headline isn't exaggerating, because the impeachment isn't the problem. The cabinet fracture is half the cabinet was willing to sign a letter declaring the president unfit under the 25th Amendment. Half refused. Let me tell you something from the business world. When the board of directors is split 50-50 on whether the CEO is competent, the company is already dead. It just hasn't filed the paperwork. That's what we're seeing now. A government where half the leadership wants to remove the president immediately, and the other half is afraid to. Not loyal, not supportive, afraid of retaliation on one side and criminal exposure on the other. This is the exact situation corporate risk analysts call decision paralysis under litigation pressure. I've seen billion-dollar firms collapse under far less. The markets have already begun the quiet exit. People always think market crashes begin with red numbers on the screen. They don't. The judiciary has moved to. Within hours of the impeachment articles being filed, 2 federal judges issued something we almost never see: judicial preservation orders. These orders essentially froze certain executive actions until Congress finishes impeachment proceedings. That means no enforcement of the contested directive, no implementation of related internal orders, no attempt to circumvent the injunction, and no pressure on agencies to ignore judicial rulings. This sounds procedural. It isn't. My friends, I am 95 years old. I've seen a lot. Bull markets that felt invincible, crashes that wiped out fortunes overnight, wars, inflation, recessions, recoveries, and a few miracles that no one ever predicted. And through all of it, I learned one thing. Markets don't panic because of noise. They panic because of uncertainty. And today I'm breaking a rule I've kept for a lifetime. I don't like talking about Washington. It's messy, emotional, unpredictable. I'd rather talk about businesses and balance sheets, about managers you can trust, and fundamentals you can measure. But this time, this isn't politics anymore. This is systemic risk. And what happened in that courtroom 1 minute ago, when Donald Trump's own defense team stood up, looked at the judge, and walked out mid-trial, that moment, that single moment, is far more dangerous than anyone realizes. You see, everyone is watching the drama. The raised voices, the angry statements, the courtroom chaos. But that's not the real story. The real story is what it signals. Because when your legal team abandons you in front of a federal judge in the middle of a criminal trial with cameras rolling, that's not a strategy. That's not a protest. That's institutional collapse. And markets pay attention when collapse touches the system. The case no one can ignore. Now, some will say, oh, this is just another Trump spectacle. His lawyers are making a point. But let me tell you something I've learned. From a lifetime of dealing with CEOs, boardrooms, and billion-dollar negotiations, lawyers don't walk out unless something inside the structure has already shattered beyond repair. A legal team represents stability, order, strategy, control. When they abandon the table, and they've done it mid-trial in a courtroom that controls the defendant's future, that isn't theater, that's a warning. And the judge, well, he understands this better than anyone. You could see it in the room. The confusion, the shock, the shift from legal argument to constitutional concern. Because when a former president sits in a courtroom with no legal representation at his side, and the case continues without him, that's when a criminal trial stops being a trial and becomes a crisis. Now, I'm not reacting to the politics of it. You know me better than that. I'm reacting to the mechanics, to the structure, to the message this sends to markets, institutions, and the world. This is not normal. This is not routine. This is not a dispute over documents or a strategic delay. When a defense team abandons a sitting or former president during live proceedings, that tells investors something scarier than guilt or innocence. There is no plan, no stability, no control over the risk. And that is exactly the kind of uncertainty that markets fear most. The missing piece the media is not talking about. Everybody will spend a day arguing about theatrics. Did the lawyers protest the judge? Did Trump demand they leave? Was this a tactic, a meltdown, a negotiation ploy? But none of that matters. What matters is this. When a legal team walks out of a courtroom, it means they believe the situation is unmanageable. And markets don't price words. They price reality. This walkout signals three things at once: loss of legal control, loss of institutional discipline, loss of predictability. That last one, predictability, is the foundation of stable markets. You can price bad news. You can price a recession. You can price a conviction, but you cannot price a defendant whose lawyers refuse to stand next to him. That is something new, something unprecedented, something investors haven't seen before. And uncertainty, my friends, is the most expensive thing in the world. The investors question, what does this mean for the system? I've lived long enough to know that the health of a democracy and the health of an economy are not separate concepts. They are the same thing. When the courts, the very institutions responsible for order, lose control of proceedings involving a former president, that destabilizes far more than one man's legal defense. It destabilizes public trust, legal precedent, the perception of national cohesion, and yes, investor confidence, because if a courtroom cannot maintain order during one of the most important trials in American history, what does that say about the rest of the system?